Okay.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Call to order. Oh, I have you. Okay, please join us as Dr. Soto leads us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, so this is a workshop meeting. There will be no action taken tonight. There is a public session after, general public comment. We're going to move right into the budget workshop discussion and presentation.
Yeah, I gave you a copy of the presentation as well for the board.
Thank you.
So the way Dr. Massera and I wanted to make this work is work this as a true workshop and kind of, as we go through each slide, have discussion, answer any questions the board may have as we hit each point. So I will pause at each slide, kind of go through the facts that are on it, and then, we can engage in conversation as we go through. So this is budget workshop number 1, which is just an overview of budget process, where we stand currently for this year and what our long-range plan is. So as you all know, our board goal as it relates fiscally is to, for fiscal and educational solvency in a tax cap environment. Board is dedicated to development of a stronger and deeper level of fiscal health to meet the needs of our students and broader community of supporting taxpayers. Through short and long-term fiscal planning, we will enhance programmatic offerings and maintain safe and environmentally sound school facilities. And then the more focused goals underneath that is to update our 4-year financial plan, ensure equitable access to technology resources, and implement a capital outlay project, which we did present even at our last meeting, a little bit more on the capital work. So just now we'll go through some information as to where we stand currently for this 21-22 school year, and this is really just our short-term planning that we work on each year. So as the board is aware, we do fund balance projections monthly. I do start them around September and October. However, starting with the close of December, we do start getting into them with a little bit more accuracy as we've gotten half of the year underway. The projections are based on the facts we know at the current time as we're completing them, and they will change continuously each month based on the information. They are not audited numbers. It is information that I use based on what I know. I speak with all the other administrators and gather information so that we can project what our spending is going to be for the rest of the school year based on purchase orders that we have in place, as well as what our revenue projections are based on our biggest, as we know, state aid is a fixed number, our taxes are a fixed number, and the only really other variables would be our tuition, so those numbers are projected based on what our true enrollment is. So for 21-22, the budget implications that we're seeing is we've had quite a few special education placements that have gone beyond the budget, and our health insurance premium increase was way higher than the budget. So we will get into that a little bit more detail now as we move on to the revenue. Our tuition for all programs are short by about $260,000, and that's primarily due to enrollment changes from what we originally projected in both East Merch's enrollment, our special education enrollment, and as well as our Native American enrollment. So we use, when we do our projections for the budget, we use, again, the information we know at that time. Based on the special education program, Dr. Soto and I get together and we go through what their CSE meetings are looking like, any new students he may be bringing in, students that may be graduating. The things we can't project are students that may have a placement change from the time we adopt that budget in April until the time we start school year. And we have seen some of that occur this school year. So that is affecting us, as well as our East Merch's enrollment. We tend to go based on trend for those projections. They had a very small class this year coming in. We saw a very low enrollment for that as compared to what was budgeted. So
when you say it was a low enrollment, you mean you got a lower percentage of their class coming to us, or because their class was smaller, you got approximately the same percentage, which is lower numbers because their class was smaller?
I believe we got the same percentage, but their class, they had a smaller class size.
So that results in a reduction.
Correct. And what the other information that affects this is our tuition rates change. So our special education program, we bill out based on actual. We do a calculation who are the actual teachers and paraprofessionals, one-to-ones that are in that classroom. And we divide it by how many students, and that gets billed out. However, for our East Mauritius and our Native American students, the state sets those rates for us based on the information we provide to them in September from our financial statements. So when the state does that, we get the actual tuition rate for the prior year around, sometimes November, December is usually when that information comes out, when the state releases those runs. And that's prior year actuals, and we get estimates for current year. Our prior year actuals came in lower than the year prior to that, and unfortunately, that's all a result of the pandemic. Our expenses are lower, as we all know. We have in 2019, 20, and 2021, our expenses were significantly lower due to the way the pandemic was running. We weren't running clubs and athletics as we normally would, so our expenditures were lower. Therefore, our tuition rate dropped as a result of that. We do anticipate that to go up because we're operating now on a normal basis. So we should see those numbers climb, the tuition rates climb in future years, but that will impact that. So combination of enrollment projections being slightly lower than what we anticipated, as well as the drop in tuition causes that shortfall.
So just a one-year anomaly based on the pandemic.
Mark, I know these virtues came to visit last week.
Yes. We had them in last week.
What's the deadline that we know how many we're getting for next year?
Okay, so due to the surge in Omicron, we actually pushed back the visitation by a couple of weeks. So we pushed back the actual notifications. So it's mid-February now.
What is the date where we kind of have to know how many are coming?
Yeah, mid-February. We're expecting a commitment.
Usually after the break, we'll have a pretty locked-in number from East Mauritius. So another area that we're seeing shortfall. Okay.
Where are just
Okay, so the special ed numbers, what happened? Like, East Mauritius, I understand the special ed numbers. Where are we? Like, are able ones, are they low, are they not? So I know we usually leave a student or two for our own in-house district, but students coming in, what happened? Where are we there?
We are almost at capacity in every section. So we walk right out of the state, and we do try to keep at least one seat available with any incoming students. At this particular time, there are certain sections that one at the elementary, one at the secondary, that we don't have capacity.
We have capacity for our own separate.
We are. That is correct.
So in the past, we had a higher percentage of students outside of district?
We did. The ratio has shifted somewhat over the last 2 years, where the majority of students were in one program after
We had a couple graduate from the tuition program, as well as some either transfer back to their home school or to a BOCES based on their needs. There are times where they might come to us for elementary, but when they get up to the upper levels, their districts can take them back into their own programs. We're seeing that shift of enrollment on tuition basis.
Yeah, I think we've seen trends more so where districts are choosing and making a commitment to educate their own students, so they're bringing them back to district.
How much of the enrollment has changed? Significant change, or
In the area of special education, the special ed numbers? I think we saw about 3 or 4.
Overall, so I'm looking at the timeline for this $260,000. At what point did that become clear?
Summer to now, we've seen about 4 or 5 new students that came into the district that are living at an out of district resident. So generally, something like that, we're going to raise the have a conversation with parents, to look at all the well-being occupations and make an assessment as to whether or not your entering the program can support the needs of that student. The course introduction that they come in, unfortunately, they will place them out of district or their own district before coming to us, so we have to sort of acknowledge it and respect that.
Yes.
It did. It happened after we made the projection for the 20
So, you know, as we know, this is a moving line item every year. You know, we go based off of the information we have at the time. And for our revenue source to bring those kids in, you know, they're constantly looking at, districts are contacting us at, you know, constantly, and the team evaluates those children to see if they would fit our program, if there's room in our classes. But we are seeing that shift, that our students need those seats. So the ability to bring in more tuition is, you know, kind of hurting us. You know, we don't have that ability right now because we don't have the space. But the loss of children that have transferred out of our district that were placed here from other districts, that too happened since, really since April adoption. There were just some minor placement changes, and I think a lot could also, you know, be, you know, I can't speak for the special ed committee, but we're seeing a lot of changes happening as a result of the pandemic.
I think also one of the things that I would note is that, and we've talked about this, the lack of buffer built into the district for special education placements is something that hurts, because if you have a buffer or two for a special education placement, you know, then you can absorb this at least somewhat. So when you get these transfers and there's no buffer built into the budget, it's a hit.
I don't have the percentage off the top of my head. I mean, we have about 7 or 8 special education students tuitioned in. We have 86 Native American students. And then East Moriches, we have about 60 something possibly, in the 60s. And so everyone comes in at different rates too. So for East Moriches, if they're a general education student, there's one rate set for grades 7 through 12, but if they're special education, it's a different rate that the state set. For our students that are Native Americans, there's multiple rates. There's a K-6 and then a 7-12, as well as the same and increased rate for those that are in special education classified positions. And then, like I said, for our students that are tuitioned in from outside districts, we set those rates, and those are based on the actual costs of that classroom that they're involved in.
Can we get those specific numbers?
Sure. You want what we had in the budget for 20, where are we in? We're in 21, 22 we're in, right?
We budgeted what we actually have, and then I guess it's going to come, I guess, for projections.
Yes, we will move forward. We'll give you guys what we are currently running this year versus what we're projecting for next year as we get into that section of the budget process. Yep.
Can we get the specific tuition numbers too?
Yes.
For each special ed, Native American?
Yep. What their rates are?
Yeah. Thank you. Maybe historical, Karen, just so we can see the changes that you're telling us about?
Yep, we have it. It's all easily accessible.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
So another area that we're seeing fluctuation happening, and as a result of the pandemic as well as our interest, we budgeted about $75,000 worth of interest, and we are not going to meet it. We're hoping to get up to about $24,000 of interest, and that's just simply due to rate declines. We do invest our monies we have 2 different banks that we use. One is strictly for investments, where we do a letter of credit for that money, which does give us a little bit higher of an interest rate, but we have seen a decline in those rates. So unfortunately, we are not going to meet the interest expectations. And you know, it was the same thing as last year. We keep dropping that interest line on the budget, and we will do it again as we move into next year, just because we're not seeing the positive side as we had seen in some years past. But other than that, all of the revenue lines are expected to meet. State aid is coming in at what we projected. Obviously, the taxes are levied at what the tax levy cap was at, and some miscellaneous items. We did just receive on Friday, I believe it was, our refund from BOCES, which actually came in significantly higher. We had budgeted $75,000. We actually got $130,000. So that was on a plus. Which we did not anticipate to see another large increase. The year before, we did get an increased rebate back from them. So just so you know, a BOCES cannot make a profit. They cannot have a fund balance. So as a school district may save on their expenditures or see excess revenues, we can put it into different reserves. A BOCES does not do that. They don't have reserves. Whatever money they save in expenditures or pull in additional revenues, it goes back to their component school districts. So based on your expenses, there's a whole formula that they put in that goes into a calculation to determine what our rebate would be in the following school year. So last year we got almost double that, and that was purely because of COVID. A lot of programs that we typically would use through BOCES were not running, so there was significant cost savings to the districts for that. So I don't anticipate that continuing. We won't be changing that budget line going into next year, just because as we're getting back to normal, expenses are normal on the BOCES side. So on the flip side now, our expenditures, we have some good and some bad. We planned for some fund balance savings, and that was using the CURSA funding, the federal funding that was enabling us to supplant funds. If you recall, we had the ARPA money and the CURSA money. ARPA is specifically allocated to learning loss, enrichment programs and such, but the CURSA was very flexible, and so we had diligently decided that we would supplant some of our budget items through that program, some of which are the first grade teacher position, 1 full-time custodian, a part-time secretary, the cyber threat assessment, and the upgraded internet services. So those are just a few of the things that total just about $200,000 that are automatic savings to our expenditures. And as we said, on the side of revenue for special education and our high costs, we've seen it on the side of our expenditures. We've had quite a few high-cost placements. As Dr. Soto was stated before, kids have moved into the district that already had placements from their previous district, and it's just not right to disrupt their services that they're already getting. So we've incurred those costs for the school year at a significant expense. And then there's also transportation expenses that go along with some of those placements that we did not budget for. The other piece is health insurance premium. So as you know, when we prepare the budget, we only have 6 months of expenses of cost for our premium, because the premium runs on a January through December calendar year, and we budget a July through June. So we have to project based on trend for health insurance rates. We budgeted a 7% increase to rates because we've been seeing almost 0%, anywhere from 0 to 2% the past few years. However, when the rates came out in November, it ended up being about a 12% increase on premium for the 2022 calendar year. So that is, as you can tell, higher than 7% that we budgeted for, resulting in only about $160,000 savings on that line, where if we had come in at a 2% rate increase, we would have had almost $500,000 worth of savings on that line. Any questions on the expense side for this year?
Are the upgraded internet services, what was that for?
We had upgraded our bandwidth because of all the Chromebooks and the Wi-Fi services that we needed. So it's about $46,000 a year. And we just now are charging it to the CURSA as we deemed it kind of COVID related. So we will continue to fund it through that to give us some savings on the expenditures. The service will continue. Yes.
Continue through this year, funding it through there, but next year.
We'll keep it, our goal is to keep it in the general fund and try to again supplant it into the CURSA to give us guaranteed fund balance at the end of the year. Is until September of 2024. Any other questions on expenses? So this is just a chart showing you some of the major categories in the expense projections: special ed, benefits, salaries, and transportation. And you can see the darker color is the budget and the lighter color is our projected expense. So you can see we're right within each of those budgets with minor savings happening, but transportation is being outpaced by the actual expenditure. Our salaries, we will continue to see a little bit of a savings in there as long as we stay status quo with what we're doing. Benefits, we're only seeing $300,000. That's overall benefits, health insurance, dental, workers' comp. Unemployment, we are not seeing any unemployment charges this year as a result of everyone is back to work. And the special education costs are flexible We're hoping not to go the way we've been going and try to keep it status quo for now.
Perry?
Yes.
Just on this one,
Go ahead.
the bar charts seem to be what I would expect just the opposite based on the previous page. So the projections are after the application is support.
Correct. So that's why we're seeing some savings in salaries, because we did allocate some salaries to the CURSA money. The contractual, so some of the other items are contract costs, which I didn't pull out contractual expenditures here. I really just went with the 4 large categories within our budget that we tend to see some vulnerability in changes happen throughout the course of the year. And like I said, we'll continue updating this on a monthly basis, and we'll give the board a monthly update as we close out each month. So now we'll move on to some long-term plans, 2022 and further, which is part of the board's goal, is to start going future. Yes?
So the I apologize, the transportation, we're over it.
We are overspent in transportation as of now and as of projections. We're just starting to get invoices in from Montauk Bus. We've had a lot of changes. We're running only eight runs at the high school, middle school versus the 10 we had budgeted for, but we are running 11 runs at the elementary building because we have some few extra buses we had to throw in there for capacity load. We've had, like I said, quite a few special education placements that require additional specialized transportation or matrons on those buses. Like we just got in some invoices, even just today, I'm starting to see some of the athletic invoices coming through. They're just starting to sort out and calm down on their side, get their routes are settled and drivers are settled, so they're starting to get their invoicing going. So now working through that. September was a bit crazy. We had some routes shared with other districts just because we had such a shortage of drivers. October was a little bit calmer. I haven't gotten October's bill from them yet. I believe I know what it should be based on my notes from the month, but then November we did steady out. So based on the information I have at my fingertips, this is what we're coming up with at this point.
So transportation, that is not a valid expense.
We could use it for CURSA, but we did not put it into that budget for CURSA. So long-term planning, when we start looking at our long-term goals and financial plan, we have to start first with the now and start managing the 21-22 expenditures, which we are doing. We froze the budget back in November in order to make sure we hit our goals for this year. We start preparing the next year's budget with sustainability in our programs and finances. We want to reduce the reliance on our fund balance, stay within the tax cap, and keep our budget-to-budget increase at or below 2%. And again, those are goals set by the board, so that's what we look for as we start going through our long-term plans and going out 4 years. So this is just a chart showing what the tax levy increase projections are, and the assumptions that are going into this is maintaining CPI at 2%. And if you all have seen in front page of Newsday on January 15th, CPI is 2%. It's actually higher than 2%, but for the tax cap, it's 2%. It does not mean districts are capped at 2%. That's just a piece of the formula. And as we get into that throughout the budget process, we will go into that calculation in depth to make sure everybody fully understands how that plays a role in it. Because another factor is the tax-based growth factor. We are assuming a steady one going forward. 2 years ago, we did see a significant peak in that, and I believe that was due to the developments on Brookfield came back onto the tax roll. We did drop off, and now we're pretty steady at this point in time. So we believe that's a fair assumption. And then the other piece of it, which has a little play in the game, is the use of debt reserve. We have debt reserve, about $360,000 in a reserve for debt, which was premium we got back on our last bond. If you recall, when we did our bonding, we had seen, it was at the time that rates were really well, and we got a lot of money back on that in our premium. That goes into a reserve to use to pay down your debt in future years. We've not used that money because it does play a part in your tax cap formula. And again, we will show that in detail as we get into that formula at the next meeting. But the goal now to steady our tax levy going forward would be to start using that reserve and keep ourselves balanced. So next year, because of CPI being fairly high, our tax levy could be above 3%, almost 4%. By putting in $100,000 of debt reserve, that lowers our levy to under 3%, which, just in my few years' experience, I think is more palatable to the community and to the board. So that's going to be our recommendation, and we'll, like I said, when we present the revenue side and the levy, we'll talk more about that. But for purposes of forecast planning, we then said, okay, to finish up using that reserve, let's do $50,000 each year thereafter to keep a steady tax cap in place. And then the other piece that comes into play is building aid and building debt and the capital reserve and the capital bond that we spoke about our last meeting, to see where that would, fall to keep us pretty balanced. So you can see these are some projections based on some formulas that we put into place using those assumptions. 2023 is still a fairly low year for our levy. It's only a $600,000 increase, but it does jump up in 2024 to the $942,000. And that's just now with everything starting to level off. We do bring the EPC debt onto the books, and we'll start seeing that aid. And then in 2026, I believe, is when I put in the projection to start receiving the aid for the proposed capital bond. So, just assumptions that we're using at this time, and we'll get into the actual calculation for next year at the next meeting.
The big jump, Gary, from 23 to 24 is the EPC bond?
Correct. We're bringing the debt on, but we won't see the aid until the year after, until the project's complete. So by bringing that debt on, it jumps you up because it's excluded, but then after that, we balance out. So this is a chart showing the revenue projections. You can see the blue is our local, which is our taxes, and supposed to be orange is the state numbers. We're seeing a significant increase in the state. You can see 22 to 23 and then 23 to 24, and that's due to the foundation aid increase. They have guaranteed the foundation aid to be fully funded in 2 years. So those are based off the numbers that we've received from the state, increasing our foundation aid, and then on top of that, we assumed an additional 2% on all other expense-based aids, just simply because we know our expenditures tend to go up by that much. So the aid should stay in line with that. The local revenue is our appropriated fund balance, which we will try to continue to reduce in the years out as per the board goals. But you can see that our reliance on our levy decreases in 2024 because of our state aid is starting to go up. So we start to see a change and a shift from what we're used to as a result of foundation aid being fully funded. They are also talking about reworking that formula going forward, holding harmless, but reworking it potentially in future years as well so that it runs properly. So that could change these numbers. But what really is important to note is the shift that we'll start seeing is that we will be relying a little bit more on state aid than we will on our taxpayers moving forward.
Does this state aid also include Governor Hope just be that said we can get it?
Yes. Yes. Yep. So this is a breakdown of the expenses by function. In our world, we operate function, object, location. Function is the primary portion. It's the administrative cost, building and grounds, and then instructional pieces. So you can see, like instruction, we have benefits, support, and other broken out here. If you do the math on these, if you did do the math on this slide and the math on the previous slide, they're not going to equal. And it's important to note that because some of it would be funded by additional fund balance. The long-term goal as we go through each year is to provide a balanced budget. Changes will happen as we move through the process. We did not assume any retirements in these numbers because we can't predict when people are going to make life-changing decisions. So we've held flat on our staffing. And our insurance rates, we did continue to increase. So we went with a higher number of projections for the expenditure side to be conservative. And, I just want to make sure to point that out, that you'll try to do the math on the one side and add it to the second side, and it's not going to match. Dr. Sarah?
Carrie, can you go back to just a slide behind? Just because I want to reemphasize, the point that Carrie was making, and I had done the math on it before, but I forgot the precise numbers. But if you look at the 2022, 70% of the revenue will be coming from state aid. Okay, that's for the coming year. But if you project out to 2026, we projected that goes down to about 66% would be coming from local sources. So I guess the point, and what I look at it, I say, well, you know, if you're a taxpayer in Sun Richards, that's good news, right? Because, you know, $7 out of every 10 was coming from taxpayers. Now we're down to 66, 65 out of every 100. So, you know, this increase in foundation, that's the net effect. If you look at that percentage, a 5% shift in tax burden over to the state from the local taxpayers. Thanks,
That
Kevin.
doesn't correspond to the tax.
No. No, it doesn't, but the taxpayers themselves are getting more for them, essentially. And if it hadn't, there would be a more significant impact on them.
Robin, you have a question on expenses? Anybody?
This one there?
Yeah.
Yeah, so what are the projections of the benefits based on, right? You don't know what that is, but they're climbing the biggest thing.
They're climbing. Right now, they're based on coming out of the pandemic. We've never done that before, but originally, if you look at last year's, this presentation from last year, the benefits weren't so high because we were going, the program I use for the projections, it takes the trend. You know, what's the last 7 years of trend in order to apply that percent going forward. Then we have to go in and say, okay, there's a trend, but we're also working under a pandemic and coming out of one, which is a medical pandemic, which is now hitting the insurance world. So we've had to bump those numbers up. Not only though in the insurance side, but on the pension side. We're seeing increase on the pension rates as well because the market dropped. So for like the teachers' retirement system, they do a aggregate of the past few years for their rate. And now with the markets, when they took decline, that's going to start impacting those rates. So we're going to start seeing a higher increase in the TRS and ERS system as well. So we had to kind of manipulate those numbers going forward. I believe we used 12% going forward in the health insurance with a few spikes, you know, in a couple of those years, just to be conservative, just to say worst case scenario, where would we land? What is our shortfall between revenue and expenses? And that's really what this is showing. You know, we could show you a balanced revenue to budget, but it's not reality at this point in time. We do know that there's work to be done and we need to continue, and that's why, you know, we have to diligently plan this year as well as for next year so that we can balance out in these future years, 24, 25, and 26, to make those numbers more closer to accurate. And then when we do start seeing some retirements or health insurance come in lower than projected, it starts closing that gap and we don't have a reliance on fund balance.
Yeah, no, that answers it. I was just curious how much compensating the other.
Yeah, the system, I use this, it's called Forecast 5, is the company that runs the software program. I load our data into it monthly. The treasurer's report comes out of that every month, all those charts and the graphs that you see, that's coming out of that system. But now they have a projection function. In the past, we used to use Excel, and if you had a formula error, things could really go askew. So now it, you know, there's a whole assumption program within there that assists. It's called Assumption Assist, and literally goes through line by line, looking at trend and saying, okay, do you want to keep what the trend is, or do we want to shift some things because we know what's forthcoming in certain years? You know, the other is when I look at special education, I have from the special education department some of those students that are placed at BOCES or at high placement places when they're going to graduate. You know, at what point will they no longer be on our financial side, so I can start changing those numbers. But then, you know, as some do move in, so we play with that information. If I may have 4 students that are graduating, we would assume maybe 2 more are coming in for those 4 that are graduating. So that's kind of where we have to be careful. The same on the revenue side. As we have tuition students that are graduating, we assume 1 would come in for every 2 that would graduate, to be conservative. You know, I can't say we're going to have 2 graduate, but we'll bring 4 more in. So, you know, we try to make sure we go off of trend, but also what reality is. So this is just a simple bar graph showing the revenues versus expenditures, where you can see the revenues in 24 are just slightly higher than expenses, but then in 25 and 26, the expenditures are outpacing the revenues. So like I was just saying, we use historical trends and for the revenue projections for tuition and historical trends based on what's going on for current enrollment. And again, just another chart showing what our fund balance as a whole would be going forward. We do see some ups and downs. We did decrease the reliance on fund balance by $100,000 each year based on the board goal to get to $800,000. The apply reserves each year to cover expenditures as related to retirement costs. And then the goal would be to replenish what we use year after year based on potential savings within the budget. So again, as we plan for long term, we want to continue to review our tuition programs and increase enrollment there because that is revenue to the district. Maximize our efficiencies in transportation. We're continuously reevaluating our routes. Obviously, the past 2 years have made it a little bit difficult to make changes, but as we start to get to normal and we work through the summer, we will be looking at our routes again to see if there's any changes necessary to make more efficiencies. Review support staff needs, explore more shared services for contractual savings, and just continue to look at our staffing needs based on our enrollment. And that we do every year as we go through the budget process. We as an administrative team sit down with each building and go through what their enrollment is and what the needs are to determine what our staffing needs are. So now as we get into the 22-23 budget development, we begin this process in November. So July and August, my office is closing out the prior year. September, we're still closing out the prior year, but working in the current year. And then about October, November, I switch into the new year. And we start preparing for that budget. So we meet with the principals, they start preparing their budget. They usually have that due to me in December before the recess. We review it as administration in district office. We've been meeting with the building principals in January about their staffing needs and their wish list and what programs they're looking to maintain, what they might not feel they need anymore, or what are they looking to add. We start looking at student placements within our district. Those might be out of district. We look at our tuition students, who's going to be continuing in the following school year. Enrollment review with East Moriches, seniors that are aging out, projected kindergarten. We're trying to get as accurate numbers as we can for the incoming K class. We update benefits and review contracts for extensions. We're already putting out RFPs and bids for any contractual expenses for next year so we can get a true budget number for those items. And then we go through BOCES line by line, coaster by coaster to determine programming needs from them. So this is the actual process of our board meetings and what we will be going through each meeting. So this meeting was just review where we stand right now. The February meeting, we will go through the tax cap calculation, which is due on March 1st. We'll review projected enrollment and staffing for the administration team and buildings and ground budget versus their 3-year actual trends. So I've already started meeting with buildings and ground so that we can be set for February and kind of lock those numbers in. Those are areas we don't typically start seeing changes happening as we move through the budget process, so we do like to lock them in early. In March, we'll go through projections for tuition, enrollment, try to finalize staffing as best we can, as well as review athletics, arts, and extracurricular programming. And then in April, we will be sure to lock all projections in. The board adopts the budget mid-April, and we will file the tax report card with SED. And then in May, we do our budget hearing and the annual budget vote. So just a quick synopsis, though, of where we stand at this point in time with our budget prep. We do continue to see state aid as it was projected last year for the phase-in. We are getting $2.3 million of foundation aid increase, and our other aids are going just about $200,000 up, and those are all expense-driven aids. As I had stated earlier, our tax levy is anticipated to be just above 2%. Right now, we're calculating about 2.5%. It's about a $600,000 increase over this current school year. And we will be seeing a tuition revenue decrease, and again, based on enrollment. So we're seeing that at this point in time, about a $250,000 decrease in revenue. So our total anticipated revenue as it stands today is about $2.7 million increase, which is a 6%. And that's a huge number. We try to keep our budget at a 2% increase, but we do have a significant anomaly here, which is our foundation aid of $2.3 million. So it's kind of going to be a year where we won't be a 2% budget-to-budget increase, strictly because we are starting to get our funding back and try to get programs back to where we were a few years ago. Again, these numbers are ever-changing. They have changed since I put this slide together, and we will continue to update the board as we go through the budgetary process. On the expense side, as we've stated, special education costs are up due to enrollment. So our 21-22 students with special needs have seen a significant enrollment. That information will roll into next school year, and it's about a $630,000 increase to the budget. Health insurance, as I stated, is a 12% increase in premium for half of the year. We do anticipate the rates continuing to grow in the 23 calendar year. So we're right now using 15% increase on rates for the projection, which is about $1 million increase on the expenditure side. Teacher retirement will see an increase in rates as well. It's a $200,000 cost to the budget. Transportation contract will increase based on CPI. We have fallen out of the purchased out-of-work contract, which also included a significant discount to the contract, and based on our negotiated contracts extending with Montauk Bus, that discount will go away and we will increase based on CPI. That number doesn't come out until May, so we have to use kind of looking at the trends of CPI right now. So right now we're just about a $500,000 increase on transportation. And then we'll have our normal, collective bargaining agreement increases on the annual budget. So if you look back at revenue, we got $2.3 million in foundation aid, and you can see here we have spent $2.3 million.
Say that again, Sharon. Say that again, because I was trying to do that.
So in our revenue side, where we're getting $2.3 million in foundation aid, our expenditures here that we've listed is about $2.3 million.
Oh, perfect.
Okay? Just in summary. So my little seesaw here kind of puts it in perspective. Our expenditures are higher than our revenues as it stands today versus where we will be in a few months. We will provide a balanced budget and a sound budget to the board as we go through this process, but it's still early in the game. We're only in January and a lot of information is still forthcoming. We're still meeting with the teams and going through what our needs are. So please rest assured we will get to the point where we need to be. We're not stressing about this much right now because we know as we go through this process, changes occur. Information that we will be getting in the next few weeks will help us starting to balance this budget.
Can I just ask you on the expenditure side, how conservative are you in these estimates? For example, the health insurance at 15%. Do you really anticipate it going up 15%? Just being very conservative.
Being very conservative right now.
13, we're all happy.
We could drop that potentially, like that's what I'm saying. As we go through this process, maybe we'll drop it down to the 12%. Dr. Massera and I've had that question. For right now, I'm not comfortable doing that just because I'm nervous. The health insurance is known for potentially going 20% increases out of nowhere. And to see such a spike from a 2% to a 12%, it shocks all of us. I mean, because districts used to budget 20%, and they've all started cutting back on that because they were building so much fund balance from all those savings, so they started backing off. But we could certainly start cutting that down. Every percent, it's about $64,000 that we would save on the budget. So it's something that we will start looking at as we move through this process.
I would say, to be clear, we thought that 7% was a conservative estimate. It came in at 12. So Kerry is going conservative, further conservative than 15.
So as I stated earlier, the tax cap is filed by March 1st. So we will be presenting at the February 16th meeting what that calculation is and what the limit is that will be reported to the controller. BOCES doesn't release their budget till March 1st, so we don't know what the increases are yet for some of those COSERs. Typically, staff retirements, April 1st is the deadline for them to receive certain contractual incentives. And state aid, right now we have preliminary information. We don't anticipate the numbers changing much. Final information is received April 1st. And just a reminder, we do have the capital outlay project continuing into next year, the $100,000, of which we will start seeing the state aid next year. I guess on a good note, just so the board is aware, we finally received our permits for this year's capital outlay projects. Monday morning, I got the email, and the purchase orders are going out, and we're hoping actually over February break, the water fountains will be installed, and the fans at Clayton Huey, the exhaust fans, will start getting worked on. So that's a piece of good news that we received this week. We are looking to do authorization of a capital reserve, which will be on the May ballot, and we'll continue to get through that and explain that as we go through this process more. We did go through it at our last meeting with the Facilities Committee. That reserve to not exceed $5 million and funded through annual savings. And the budget will include annual maintenance and repairs as per the capital plan that we're putting together with the Facilities Committee. So our next meeting is February 16th, 7 p.m., location to be determined, and we'll go through revenue projections, the administrative, transportation, buildings and grounds, and benefits as a whole.
After we do the revenue portion, can you give a little bit more how they did do the whole foundation aid, how we've gotten more good? There were over the years, that's another big fight we have board members. I'm sure that there are full past board members who are very happy. We all are, but
Yeah.
you know, we had past board members who did a lot of work on that, and you know, I just think that we could explain that a little bit more often.
So we were funded at 59% heading 2 years ago. And so we were pretty significantly underfunded. And it was a 3-year increase. So that's where that came. So we got, each year, we got a significant increase last year, then in the last 2 years, and this coming year and the following year, it's a 50% increase on what is owed to us. And I mean, overall, I have to say the legislature really did a great job. Or excuse me, the governor's proposal, legislature. Usually we're in a position where we're seeking more from the legislature. What we're basically seeking this year is to have the legislature give us what the governor offered, but further make some additional changes that are more, you know, some flexibility in funding and things like that. You know, so for instance, capital outlay projects. Capital outlay projects, some of the things that we're seeking is increasing that to $250,000 in projects over multiple years and in multiple buildings. You know, right now it's streamlined. It's $100,000. It's one project and in one building. You know, so and in 1 year. So things like that, some regulatory flexibility in reserves going above 4% is something that we're seeking. So those are kind of the advocacy things that we're looking for. But clearly, the commitment to fully fund foundation aid, it was a huge get that we're really feeling very comfortable with. Otherwise, budget would look very different this year.
Very good. Good? Yeah, thank you. That was a very thorough presentation. Very much. Thank you very much for that. That brings us to the general public comment section. If anybody in the general public has a comment, question? No? Okay.
Anybody sign in, Bill? Anybody?
Shot in, Bill? Anybody?
Nope.
All right, motion to adjourn? Motion, second? Second, all in favor? Yes, motion carries unanimously. Our next meeting, January 26th, location to be determined, exactly around 6 o'clock, and public session around 7. 8?
February 16th.
Oh, it says 26th. I meant
Wednesday, February 16th.
The 16th. So what am I? All right. I'm not even making excuses. I just missed it. February 16th. 6 o'clock exact, 7 o'clock actually. Thank you very much.